Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a high-speed plunge into a really complex world. It's where massive, sudden resource wealth collides head-on with these, established political systems.
Yeah.
We are talking about the intersection of oil and governance, and we're focusing in on the story of Guyana.
And Guyana is a country undergoing, one of the most rapid economic transformations anywhere in the world right now, all thanks to these staggering oil discoveries.
Right.
Our mission today is to look past just the economic headlines. We want to understand what this wealth is actually doing to the fundamental architecture of power within the state.
And our source material for this is, it's ambitious, to say the least.
It is.
It's a detailed political science dissertation. It's written by Hadiyyah Mohamed, a graduate student, and also a candidate for the We Invest in Nationhood, that's the W party.
And this research was part of her master's degree from Scotland. And it wasn't just some class paper. It was presented to a serious international academic audience.
So this is a heavy hitter.
It is. And the document, it really doesn't pull any punches. We're here to unpack its profoundly provocative title.
Which is?
Oil, Corruption, and Continuity. How Guyana's new elites rebuilt the colonial empire.
Wow.
That title alone is a thesis statement, right? It suggests that far from modernizing, the country's power structures are essentially recycling old historical patterns.
Okay, let's unpack this. The title tells you the conclusion we are heading toward isn't one of, liberation and reform.
Wow.
It's one of surprising, entrenched continuity. It's this claim that new money isn't disrupting old forms of control. It's actually facilitating them.
Precisely. The study provides what we'd call a critical political economy analysis of Guyana's governance, specifically during this oil era.
So what does that mean in practice?
It means instead of just looking at, say, legislative changes or GDP figures, this approach acts like an X-ray of the state. It looks beneath all the formal institutions to analyze where the real levers of money, of influence, and political power truly lie.
And who is the focus of this academic X-ray? Which group's role is being analyzed?
The research specifically scrutinizes the role of successive People's Progressive Party, the PPP governments.
Okay, since the oil boom started.
Right. The central question is really, did the governing party's handling of this massive wealth lead to a true break from the past? Or, as the title argues, did it just reinforce older, much more problematic systems?
And that's a crucial distinction, because when a country gets a resource windfall like Guyana, you would hope, the ideal is that the established systems, the checks and balances, would get stronger to manage it all responsibly.
You would hope. And to test that, the researcher combined two major conceptual models. The first is what we call post-colonial frameworks.
Okay.
This basically acknowledges that when a colonial power leaves, they don't leave a clean slate. They leave behind institutional pathways, certain mindsets, power hierarchies, things that tend to persist. You could almost call them institutional ghosts.
So the systems inherited from the colonial era, they don't just vanish when the flag changes.
Not at all.
They often linger, and they create these structural advantages for whichever group manages to capture the state apparatus first.
Exactly. And the second framework is resource governance.
Right.
This looks at the paradox of resource wealth, what some people call the resource curse.
Right.
It analyzes how nations manage and distribute revenues from natural resources. It's all about transparency, allocation, accountability.
So by merging those two models.
By merging them, the dissertation asks the critical question: what happens when massive, destabilizing resource wealth pours into a state system that's already fundamentally shaped by these post-colonial dynamics?
That intersection is the whole ballgame.
It is.
Does the oil money give them the leverage to finally break free from those old inherited structures, or does it just provide new, potent fuel for those very same structures?
And the dissertation's core thesis on that is clear. It's academically rigorous, and it is stark. It argues that under the current government, colonial patterns of domination, of resource extraction, and unequal distribution have been rebuilt.
Rebuilt, not just continued.
Rebuilt, not dismantled. It asserts that this whole transition to oil wealth has actually facilitated continuity, not radical reform.
But wait, isn't that a pretty harsh claim? Couldn't someone argue that the PPP is simply using state funds for standard infrastructure development, and this is just, opposition rhetoric? How does the methodology prove that link between new wealth and old patterns?
That's the strength of using that critical political economy lens. It focuses on the mechanisms.
Okay.
The study identifies two primary enabling factors, and they aren't just secondary issues. The paper argues they are the intentional mechanisms through which the old colonial system is given new life.
And those factors are?
Corruption and elite entrenchment.
So in this view, corruption isn't just accidental theft.
No.
It's a necessary political tool for shaping institutional outcomes in favor of that entrenched elite. It's the grease for the continuity machine.
Precisely. The paper argues the oil flow didn't force a pivot toward robust democratic accountability. Instead, the existing political architecture bent the oil wealth to serve its continued dominance.
Wow. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes. The researcher found that the methods of resource extraction and political control used by this new elite, they closely mirror the vertical, centralized control models that were used during the British colonial era.
So the structure of control remained the same, even though the people controlling it were now Guyanese.
That's the argument. The implication here is staggering because it completely flips the typical narrative of resource wealth promoting modernization.
Right.
It shows that the money stream actually prioritized the stabilization of existing power over the structural reform that would be needed to break those old colonial habits.
So the money just accelerated a trajectory that was already set?
It did. The dissertation explicitly interrogates how specific existing political factors persisted and adapted under these new conditions.
Okay, let's get granular then. If the overall thesis is this continuation of extraction, what specific institutional weaknesses did the dissertation identify? We need to look at the pillars that allowed for this elite consolidation.
Yes. The study pinpointed three highly resilient mechanisms. These are the institutional and political gears that adapted perfectly to this massive, rapid influx of oil revenue.
And allowed the existing elite to consolidate their power.
Exactly.
What's the first mechanism?
The first is long-standing party dominance. This refers to the continuation of established political power structures, where one party, in this case the PPP, maintains significant, just deeply rooted control over the political landscape.
And the electoral machinery, the key state institutions.
All of it. So in a state that's already dominated by one political force, the sudden appearance of unprecedented capital, it just acts as a force multiplier.
So the party's institutional inertia becomes the perfect funnel for all this new money.
The perfect funnel. It ensures that the wealth is managed by those already in power, which reinforces their position rather than challenging it.
I see.
And when you have a massive new revenue stream that bypasses traditional taxation, I mean, oil money is largely independent of the domestic tax base, it makes the dominant party even less accountable to the populace.
Right. Their financial survival no longer relies on broad public consent or, general economic health.
It relies on controlling the flow of oil wealth, period.
And that leads directly to the second mechanism, which sounds like the logical next step for securing that control, executive centralization.
That's right. This is the increasing concentration of power within the executive branch of government.
And that often means severely limiting or just bypassing the authority of, say, parliamentary oversight.
Or judicial independence, or the crucial input from civil society that's supposed to ensure transparency. All of it gets sidelined.
So how does oil money specifically supercharge that centralization? Is it just that the president signs more laws, or is it more insidious?
It's both. Massive oil revenues are often managed through these national resource funds or state-owned oil companies. And because the revenue is so large and the contracts are so complex, the tendency is to concentrate decision-making authority in a few high-level executive positions.
Under the guise of efficiency or national security, I imagine.
Of course. And this effectively bypasses the slower, more deliberative processes of the legislature, like the parliament or the Auditor General's office.
So the speed and the scale of the money demand rapid decisions, and that urgency is then used as the justification to neuter the slow, accountable institutions.
Exactly.
It sounds like a textbook recipe for entrenching power and limiting any internal critique of how the money is spent.
It is the perfect structure for elite capture. And that brings us to the third, and you could argue the most functional, mechanism the study identified, the persistence of patronage networks.
Ah, the lubrication for the entire machine.
Indeed. Patronage involves the strategic use of state resources, public sector jobs, government contracts, preferential appointments, lucrative permits, all to maintain loyalty and support among key groups.
both inside the party and across the wider populace.
Correct.
So before the oil boom, state resources were finite. Now, with oil revenue potentially multiplying the national budget exponentially, how does the dissertation say these patronage networks change?
They don't just expand. They skyrocket in significance and sophistication. The scale of contracts in the oil sector is massive. I mean, it far exceeds anything in traditional sectors like sugar or bauxite.
Right.
So by maintaining tight control over that centralized executive and the dominant party structure, the elite can direct these huge contracts and resources to loyalists and affiliated businesses.
Which creates a deeply invested, a new political economic elite.
An elite whose fortunes are inextricably tied to the continued dominance of the ruling party.
This sounds far more effective than just handing out small favors. This is about creating a dependent commercial class.
It's about creating a new class of powerful beneficiaries, the new political economic elite, whose primary source of wealth and influence is proximity to state power.
Specifically, the power to allocate oil revenue.
Yes.
And this takes us right back to the heart of that rebuilt colonial empire claim. The wealth doesn't flow to dismantle structures.
It reinforces the power of the group already closely tied to state control.
So the study is arguing that the country simply swapped out the external colonial masters for a domestically entrenched elite, but the fundamental relationship of extraction and vertical control that remains unchanged.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The new wealth serves not as a disruptive force for democratic or institutional reform, but as a stabilizing and consolidating force for the existing mechanisms of political control and domination.
So it secures the position of those who were already positioned to capture and direct the state apparatus.
It does. It's a fascinating and, frankly, sobering deep dive into the real-world implications of political economy.
It really connects the micro details of resource contracts and political appointments to the macro narrative of post-colonial state development.
And it provides a warning that the mere availability of resources does not guarantee progress.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? The key takeaway here is that analyzing post-colonial states through this lens of resource governance, it reveals a critical paradox. New, massive resource wealth can, paradoxically, reinforce historical systems of extraction and domination. It does this by fueling political centralization and elite capture, even if the faces within that elite have changed.
The research provides a vital, evidence-based framework for understanding this institutional inertia and political adaptation in resource-rich nations all over the globe.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the political wiring determines where the massive flood of money will end up. If the wires favor centralization and party dominance, that's precisely where the power and the wealth will concentrate.
And this raises a final, critical question for you to mull over.
Yeah.
If the study found that existing mechanisms like executive centralization and long-standing party dominance adapted so readily to the sudden, massive flow of oil money to consolidate this new elite, this suggests a fundamental challenge. Is the concentration of rapid, massive resource wealth fundamentally incompatible with the long-term dismantling of centralized political control in post-colonial states?